So the Buffalo Sabres are a team that perennially feels like they're in a rebuild/retool, and I count myself amongst the people that are hopeful that that trend is going to change moving forward. I just have to, and I've really liked how the Sabres have built their future over the last few seasons. So today we're going to be looking at the prospect pipeline of the Buffalo Sabres from a top-down view. We're going to group their players into some various tiers, and what we're going to do first is just define what a prospect is in the line of our work, as well as what these tiers generally mean. So a prospect is a player within 5 years of their first year of NHL draft eligibility who have also not been on an NHL roster more than a full season. So for Buffalo, a player like John Jason Peterka would not be on this list, for example. Rest assured, I'm a really big fan of JJ Peterka. We'll just set that aside. But then the tiers start from a franchise player, which is basically a Sidney Crosby level. You have them forever, you never ever want to move them, and they are vitally important to your team. You've got core level players who are very important. You really don't want to have to trade them unless you have to, and they really round out that top end of your roster. Then you have your depth tier, which is your second, third, fourth line, everyday NHL players in various roles. Then you have your maybes, which are maybe on the outside looking in. They have high upside and a lot of question marks, or maybe a little bit lower upside and just might not have enough to make it to the NHL one day, but they do still have the possibility of getting there. And then at the bottom you have everybody else. First off, with the core category, you will note that Zach Benson is not in here because he played a full season with the Sabres roster last season. Now, I really liked him, and I think he belongs in this group, so if he were still eligible, this is where he would be, and this is where he was over the course of last season. I'm a big fan of Zach Benson, but there are other players I'd like to get to instead. Starting with Konsta Helenius, who they just drafted in this past NHL draft, and I've grown to be a pretty decent fan of Konsta Helenius, and where he went in the draft is around where I probably would have thought about taking him. He's a pretty good player that I think really rounds out what Buffalo's been drafting over the last few years. You don't want to draft on need, but you do want to draft things that are good players that are outside of a bubble that you might be locked within, and I think Helenius' balanced 200-foot game with some physicality and some really good smarts really balances some of the more high-octane offensive players that they've drafted over the last few seasons. The other player in here is Devin Levi, who did have a bit of a rocky season in the NHL last year, but was really good with Rochester last season. He's really stretching the definition of what I consider a prospect, but I do think that there's a lot of high hopes for Devin Levi's future in Buffalo. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen might be taking over the starter's job for now, but I don't think there's anything wrong with a guy like Devin Levi working his way into that 1B category, being a backup or just a supportive alternative for a guy like Luukkonen over the next few years. We'll see what happens. Goalies are strange, but I remain a pretty big fan of Devin Levi whenever I've seen him. In the depth category, we've got a few players in here, guys like Noah Ostlund, Isaac Racine, and Yuri Kulich, who are all previously first-round picks of the Buffalo Sabres. I'm huge fans of all of these players, but the reason they're in this tier is because I'm not sure they're going to be core-level, super high-end NHL players. Rather, maybe more those second and third line guys that you can play every single night and get good seasons out of. I'm a really big fan of Noah Ostlund's potential especially, and will be fascinated to see what he does with Rochester this year if that's where he plays. Yuri Kulich had a really good season last year that got him a couple of NHL games here and there. Isaac Racine did the same. They've got a really interesting trio there that I think could round out their roster pretty well. In there as well, we've got Anton Wahlberg and Adam Kleber, a couple of second-round picks they've made in the last few years, who I think have a lot of upside, who maybe just haven't quite gotten there yet. A guy like Kleber has a lot of upside, but needs a lot of time to get there, but I remain positive that he should get there over time with a few years in college. Down in the maybes category, we start with Brody Ziemer, who I've really liked watching this past season. He's just such a smart player. He's going to a great program with the University of Minnesota, and I do really think that there's going to be a long-term development curve that breaks positively for him. His talent profile does need to get a bit better. He's a bit of a lower pace player, but he's really creative and really smart, and that can take him a ways. Down here as well are a couple of Russians they've drafted over the years in Alexander Kisakov, Prokhor Poltapov, and Nikita Novikov. Out of those guys, the one that I am interested in the most has been Nikita Novikov, who, as he has continued to play in North America, in my view, has just gotten better and better as a tall, rangy defenseman who can really skate, and you can build around that. Guys like Poltapov and Kisakov, I think, are a bit more of a long shot, but could maybe round out a depth role on the team in the future, especially Poltapov. And we have three goaltenders in this tier in Topias Lehinen, Ryerson Leenders, and Scott Ratzlaff, and all of them, I don't know, We'll see. I mean, personally, I'm surprised Ryerson Leanders was a 7th round draft pick, but we'll see what happens. That's probably a pretty decent selection and pretty decent swing to take, so we'll see what happens, and they're fine goaltenders, I suppose. Then we get down to everyone else, and this is largely just older players further along in their development curve from a few drafts ago who just haven't really come along to the point where you think they're going to be NHL players. I'm kind of interested in guys like Simon Pierre Brunet and Patrick Geary in terms of their longer term development curve, but I'm not entirely sold on NHL potential with those players, and just overall down at this level, not players that I'm particularly blown away with. Ethan Miedema had some interesting physical tools. Gavin McCarthy is a relatively smart and capable defensive player, but that's not to say that it's impossible for any of these players to make it up into the NHL one day. They're just players where I think the likelihood, considering their age and how they've done over the last few years, might hold them back a little bit. And that about covers the Buffalo Sabres. If you liked the video, you can like it and subscribe to the channel and you'll never miss another video. If you really liked it, you could go to Scouching.ca and consider subscribing, where you'll get access to exclusive content like early access to videos, written content you won't find anywhere else, data tables for drafted and undrafted prospects around the world, as well as a really cool Discord server where we talk about prospects all day if that's what you're into. So if that interests you, check out Scouching.ca and consider subscribing. And in the next one, we're going to be looking at the Colorado Avalanche.